Hi guys, and welcome back to another video for Phantasy Star Online Blueburst. This will also relate to the GameCube and Xbox versions of the game as well, and there'll be some information you might be able to use for the Dreamcast versions, but there are some differences. So what I want to talk about today is the Section ID system of the game. Now, I have talked about this to some degree in some of the videos, so I did mention in my Beginner's Guide to PSO what your Section ID actually influences and how to use the Section ID system to get the ID that you want. But in this, what I want to do is I basically want to go through the IDs and go through some of the strengths and weaknesses of each of the IDs, why you might want to pick each ID, just to help make it a bit easier for new players to try and decide what ID is the most suitable one for them, because ultimately it does have a huge impact on your gameplay in PSO. So with that, let's get straight into it. So basically what I want to start with is just a very brief description of what a Section ID actually is. So a Section ID is a coloured badge that gets assigned to your character when you create it. And you can see here we have 10 different ones. Each of these IDs has an influence on how the game works for your character. So it will influence things like the types of common weapon drops that you get often. It will influence the types of common weapons that you don't get very often. It will influence your drop charts for rares. So that is sort of the main influences of Section ID. There is one or two other little things for some Section IDs as well, which I'll go into. But the main things you want to be aware of is that it's going to influence predominantly your types of weapon drops that you get more often and your rare drops. So from a PSO perspective, I suppose the rare drops is probably the most important thing later on, because you need to have an ID that is going to find you rares that are useful for your character. So because of that, having the Section ID that you want is really, really important. So again, I'm not going to go into in this video how to actually use the Section ID system to get the ID you want. That is listed in my PSO Beginner's Guide, so go and check that if you haven't already. Essentially, just to be very, very quick about it, it basically boils down to, in Blueburst, it boils down to a combination of your character class and your name. And in previous versions before Blueburst, it's just down to your name. So you can see we've got a list of these Section IDs here. And again, this is all from the Ephinea wiki. So Ephinea is the server of Blueburst that I play on, and is probably the one I'd recommend if you are playing Blueburst or looking for a server to play on, because it is quite similar to the Sega servers overall. So we have 10 different Section IDs, which are, we have VIRIDIA, GREENILL, Skyline, BLUEFULL, PURPLENUM, PINKAL, REDRIA, ORAN, YELLOWBOZE, and WHITILL. Each of these specialise in different weapon types. Each of these has unique rare drops that might be exclusive to that Section ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the Section IDs and let you know some of the strengths of the ID, if there's any weaknesses of the ID, because a lot of the IDs do also have weaknesses, and as well as any rares that you might want to consider on that ID. So one thing to note on Ephinea exclusively is there is an option to actually change your Section ID on Ephinea, but there are a lot of restrictions to it. So in other versions of the game, you will not be allowed to change your Section ID. So your Section ID is locked in once you select it. On Ephinea, if your character is under level 20, you can change your Section ID once by typing in /mod_sec_ID. And that will ask you to confirm which ID you want to change it to. But you can only do that under level 20. Occasionally the server will give out the ability to change ID once. That normally happens if they make any changes to the drop charts, because obviously you may have made a character to hunt a specific item. If that specific item then gets changed to a different Section ID, then Ephinea will often give a Section ID change out so you can change over. So with that out of the way, let's get on to the actual IDs themselves. So we'll start off with VIRIDIA. So VIRIDIA, the common weapon types that VIRIDIA gets, you can see here, it gets a lot of shot items, which are they're like the big guns that Ranger use as underarm, the ones that fire in a spread. So it gets lots of those. It also gets quite a lot of partisan drops, but not as many as shots, so it's mainly shots followed by partisans. However, it doesn't get many slicers. So if you're looking for an ID to find high hit discers, this is not the ID for you. However, one advantage of being able to find a lot of shots is that this is a very good ID for finding things like good charge arms, for example. I guess you could use berserk arms potentially, but most people are probably going to go for charge arms. So Viridia is probably one of the best IDs for finding charge arms with hit, just because they get shots more often than other IDs. But the flip side of that is that you don't want to be using it to find slices with hit, because you won't get many slicer drops. In regards to rares, you can see Ephinea on their wiki has notable rare items and notable exclusives. So notable rares, I believe the way they've done this is anything that's in notable rares is an ID that they recommend to hunt that item with, because a lot of rare items in the game can be found on several different IDs, but what you'll find quite often is there'll quite often be 1 or 2 IDs that are a bit of an easier drop for it, whether that's an easier drop rate or whether it is an easier enemy to hunt it from. So Ephinea will kind of recommend on their wiki which IDs they recommend to go for if you're looking for a specific thing. So what we'll do is we'll look at some of these drops as well, just so you can see why they recommend them. So you can see here for Viridia, the notable rare items are Limb d'Argent, Frozen Shooter, LMK38 Combat, Red Ring, Limiter, and Parasitic Gene Flow. And the notable exclusives are Madame's Parasol, Heart of Crazy Tune, Heart of Daisy Chain, and Heart of Chameleon Scythe. Just a note to anyone who's not playing on Ephinea, basically ignore any of these items that are Heart of, unless it's Heart of Poom, because that is a different item. But anything else, these are basically like cosmetic skins on Ephinea, so these won't apply to you if you're on another server. Also, if you are playing offline, ignore any references to Red Ring or Parasitic Gene Flow, because they don't drop offline on GameCube or Xbox. So if we go over to the Viridia drop chart now and look at the drop for Limb d'Argent, we can actually click on the link here actually. So Limb d'Argent is a pretty terrible weapon, but after 10,000 kills, it unseals into Excalibur, which is one of the strongest weapons in the game. You can see for Viridia, it is a rare drop from Dauphin Eclair at 1 in 3.2. You can see here, it's on this chart as well, 1 in 3.2. So Dauphin Eclair is a rare enemy, and it's probably one of the hardest rare enemies to find, because it's essentially like a rare mini-boss. But 1 in 3.2 if it does appear is a pretty good rate. So that's why they recommend Viridia for Limb d'Argent. Next up is Frozen Shooter. Now Frozen Shooter is a staple ranger weapon. It's obviously fantastic because the special instantly freezes. I don't even need to look this up. I know that the drop will be from Hill to Tor, because as far as I'm aware, Frozen Shooter only drops from Hill to Tor. So there are several IDs that do find it from Hill to Tor, which is the rare Hill Delt at a 1 in 2 rate, and Viridia is one of them. Viridia also gets the LMK38 Combat, which is a really, really interesting shot weapon that's usable by hunters. It's basically like a Gatling gun that it only hits one target, but it hits about 4 or 5 times. So if you get one with hit, it's extremely useful. Viridia gets that, I believe it's from the Caves boss. So you see here, yeah, Viridia actually gets 3 different drops for it. So either from Dalryley, which is the Caves boss at 1 in 39, or from Barbaray, which is the Temple boss at 1 in 40, well, nearly 1 in 47, or it's from Pazuzu, which is the rare Zoo in episode 4 at 1 in 2. There is another drop for YELLOWBOZE from Merrick Harrow's, but it's 1 in 394, which honestly isn't too bad a rate either, but Viridia is definitely the easier ID to get LMK38 Combat on, so that's why they recommend that. Red Ring is a drop that only drops from Dark Falls at 1 in 186. Again, there are only certain IDs that find it, and they all get it at the same rate, so essentially any ID that finds Red Ring is a recommended ID to find it, because it really doesn't matter. We also have Limiter. So Limiter is a unit that is a sealed unit that actually reduces all of your stats, but after 20,000 kills it unseals into a unit called Adept, which increases your stats and also reduces your TP consumption, so it's fantastic, particularly for forces. And you can see that there are a few IDs that get it, but Viridia gets it from Ultimate Gerta Blue Loot at 1 in 394, which isn't too bad a drop. It's probably not the drop I would use to hunt Limiter, honestly, but it's still not too bad. And finally, we have Parasitic Gene Flow, which is a drop from Olga Flow. Again, just to reiterate, this does not drop offline like Red Ring. So I think most private servers do have the Red Ring and Parasitic Gene Flow drops activated. So this is normally a 1 in 64 drop from Olga Flow. And again, there are only certain IDs that find it, so any ID that can find this from Olga Flow is a recommended ID for it. If you don't know what this is, Parasitic Gene Flow is a combination item that you use to combine with either a sword, a shot, or a rod to make either Dark Flow, Dark Meteor, or Dark Bridge. So then we've looked at the exclusives. So as I mentioned, certain section IDs can get items that only that section ID can find. So these items in notable rare items are items that VIRIDIA is good for hunting, but can be found by other IDs. These are items that only VIRIDIA can find, so you have no choice. So we have Madame's Parasol. So Madame's Parasol is a partisan weapon. It can only be equipped by female characters, and when it's equipped, it boosts the range of Resta and Anti. It also has a Spirit Special as well. It's quite a useful weapon mainly for the Resta and Anti boost range, notably because it's also usable by Hunuel and Raymal as well. So it's a really good way of turning Hunuel or Raymal into kind of support characters. And you can see the only drop for it in the game is from VIRIDIA Ultimate Gibbles at 1 in 12,603. So it's a horrible drop, it's really, really rare. You can also get it from Black Pepper's Dangerous Deal, but it would have no attributes doing it that way. So if you want one with hit, that's your only option. So good luck with that. It is a very, very hard drop. So that is Madame's Parasol. And then we have 3 different weapon skins. I'm not going to go into the weapon skins in this video because they only apply to Ephinea. So next we'll move on to GREENILL. So GREENILL is an ID that gets a lot of rifle drops. Now that can be really, really useful because there are some regular rifles that can be very, very useful even in endgame. So particularly things like Demon's Rifles, they can be really, really useful if you get one with high hit. So that is a really, really useful common weapon find to have. It also gets daggers slightly more often than normal as well. On the flip side, its weaknesses are it doesn't get many shots and it barely gets any swords. So you're not going to be using a GREENILL to hunt for a caliber to make Dark Flow because it's just not going to get many sword drops. So that is the common weapons, how they're laid out. For notable rares, we have Cannon Rouge, which is a fantastic bazooka that's extremely strong. Again, we have Frozen Shooter. We also have Handgun Gold. So Handgun Gold is a handgun with a soul special. It's not particularly strong and isn't particularly good, but the whole point of Handgun Gold is that it combines with another handgun called Handgun Miller to make a mech gun called Gold Miller, which is one of the stronger mech guns in the game. It's also known for being extremely hard to get. So on Ephinea, there are 3 drops in total for gold, but 2 of them are for 1 ID. You can see the only options we've got are GREENILL or WHITILL. For GREENILL, it's from an Ultimate Episode 2 Spaceship Del Saber at 1 in 40,330. I told you it was rare. Or alternatively, you can go with WHITILL and go for Episode 1 Ruins Grand Sorcerers at 1 in 28,807. Or Ultimate Mericus in Central Control at 1 in 20,480, which is horrible. Do not hunt it off this drop. Mericus are one of the sort of the variants of Mericarrols that don't appear as often as Mericarrols, and 1 in 20,000 is a horrible race. So I would thoroughly recommend, if you're hunting gold, go for one of these 2 first drops. I would probably lean towards the GREENILL drop, honestly, even though I know both of these are horrible drops. So even though it is a recommended ID to hunt gold, there is really no good ID to hunt gold because all of the drops are really nasty for it. We also have Heaven Striker. Heaven Striker is an Episode 4 item that is a handgun and it's the strongest handgun in the game. It also has a Berserk special, and you can also modify it to make it do Divine Punishment if you use a mag with it, strike unit mag. It is extremely busted, and it also has auto aim on its special as well. It's probably one of the most broken weapons in the entire game. Now, for drops, there are 5 different IDs that get it. You can see GREENILL is here, and we, as a GREENILL, we would get it from a Pyro Goran in episode 4, which is a pretty common enemy, at 1 in 3,344. There are other options, so you can see here that REDRIA actually has exactly the same drop. Another option is the PURPLENUM Conju. So Conju is a rare boss, and you get that at 1 in 8. The other drops I probably wouldn't bother with. The BLUEFULL Del D one, I just don't feel is worth it. You could potentially do it in this Nightmare 4 to hunt this, but there are easier ways to do it. I would personally go for the GREENILL, REDRIA, or PURPLENUM drop for this. Particularly if there's a desert quest in the Raggle Boost Road, I would definitely use the REDRIA or GREENILL drops for it. Next up we have Spread Needle, which is an infamous weapon. So this, again, pretty much a staple range weapon, at least until absolute endgame where you might replace it with a S-rank needle. It's a very, very weak weapon, but is basically a rifle that shoots in a spread and has a paralyze special. So it's really, really good for crowd control. Now, for Spread Needle, there is a few IDs that get it. So we have 4 different IDs: GREENILL, PURPLENUM, REDRIA, and YELLOWBOZE. And you can see most of the drops are from Merlins in episode 1, at 1 in 900. The only exception being REDRIA that gets it from a Darkbringer instead. It's an easier drop rate, but from a much more infrequent enemy. So yeah, for this, I would probably go with one of the Merlin drops. It's a much easier drop. So what you can see by looking at GREENILL is it's a very Ranger-centric ID. With VIRIDIA, you could see it was kind of a bit of a mixture between Hunter and Ranger, but pretty terrible for Force. So I would probably not recommend going with a VIRIDIA Force. The exception to this is it depends what you're wanting to do with your character. If you're wanting to hunt items for that specific character, then you probably don't want to go with a VIRIDIA Force because you're not going to find that many Force items. However, another common tactic that you can do in PSO is to make a character with an ID that might not be suitable for itself, but is good for hunting specific things. An example of that is, as we'll get onto in a little bit, is using a Skyline Ranger. Although Skyline is a hunter drop, is a hunter ID mainly, a lot of its drops are in areas that are much easier for Rangers to do. So a lot of people will make Skyline Rangers to hunt the drops and then send them over to the hunter. So that is another way you can do it. So for GREENILL, obviously it's a very, very heavily Ranger focused ID. You can see here as well, we do also have things like, again, we've got the Red Ring. We also have V101 and V502, which are both fantastic units. V101 in particular is a unit that pretty much everyone is going to want to go for in Blue Burst. It is basically a unit that gives you 15 to all of your stats, and it has a built-in Heavenly Battle, which gives you a 40% attack speed increase. It's probably the most used unit in the game, in endgame. Pretty much everyone uses V101. I think the only class I can think of that might not use it is maybe Phonuel, because Phonuel obviously doesn't really need the Heavenly Battle speed. But I mean, even if Phonium could get some use out of it. So you can see we have 4 different IDs for it. The VIRIDIA drop, this has just changed recently actually. So this used to be from a Sinnoh Blue, and they've now changed it so it's from a Crimson Assassin in episode 1, and it's at 1 in 2,291. Other options are you have GREENILL Zoos at 1 in 2,048, or you can go for ORAN or YELLOWBOZE. Honestly, I kind of feel that all of these ID drops are much of a muchness. They're kind of similar. You can run quests like Random Attack Exard and hope for the spaceship route, because inexplicably that gives you episode 1 drops in that quest. That has a lot of assassins in it. There are a lot of quests that have zoos in episode 4, so this could be a really useful ID to hunt it on. I know from personal experience, the V101s that I've seen drop, most of them have been from zoos. Or you've got the 2 mines drops here as well. But just having the ability to get V101 is a really big bonus to your ID, because it's such a useful unit. V502 is another one that increases the success rate of certain specials. So again, extremely useful. So now move on to Skyline. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of this ID. So Skylight gets a lot of sword drops, so that makes it a fantastic ID for finding things like material calibers to turn into dark flow. So you're much more likely to find a caliber with hit if you're running Skylight, because Skylight gets more sword drops. It's not that Skylight has a higher chance to get hit, that's the same as pretty much every other ID. It's just that because Skylight gets more sword drops in general, you're more likely to combine that with the chance for hit. You also get slightly more rifles than normal, but not as many as GREENILL. Downsides of Skylight is you don't get many shots and you barely get any mech guns. This is actually a huge disadvantage with Skylight because, as anyone who's played PSO towards the end game will know, as a hunter in particular, you use a lot of mech guns later on, particularly things like charge Vulcans, and you barely ever get Vulcan drops with Skylight. You are basically reliant on the ones in the shop showing up, which just doesn't happen. So if you play Skylight, you're probably going to have to trade for some charge Vulcans unless you get lucky in the shop. The other big downside of Skylight that isn't mentioned here is Skylight is very, very heavily focused towards weapons. There is very, very little in the way of armors, shields, units, to the point where I kind of feel that if you run a Skylight, you need to run a second section ID with it to find the other stuff. I personally have a Skylight and a REDRIA, so my REDRIA finds a lot of the defensive gear and my Skylight finds the weapons. So just be aware of that, it is extremely offensive focused. Notable drops, we have things like the Dialect Scar. So Dialect Scar is an extremely strong dagger in Blue Burst. Daggers generally aren't that good because of the animation, but Dialect Scar is so strong you can make it work. And it has a Berserk special as well. It says here it doesn't actually have the highest attack power because that's 2 Kamui, and Red Dagger with Crimson Coat also beats it. But it has a Berserk special. It can have hit, which 2 Kamui cannot have hit because it's a trading item. And for some reason, Dialect Scar can also be equipped by Rangers, which is ridiculous. So for Dialect Scar, again, there are only 3 IDs that get it. You can see Skylight is here as a Ultimate Spaceship Baron's drop at 1 in 1260, which is also shared by YELLOWBOZE. ORAN also gets it from a Del Saber at the same rate. So this ORAN drop is honestly probably better because Del Sabers tend to be more common than Barons in Spaceship. But the downside of the ORAN drop is that quite often Del Sabers will usually drop something good anyway. So for Skylight, I believe Del Sabers in F2 drop, I think it's Guren. So you're essentially losing the good Del Saber drop to get the Dialect Scar drop. I can't remember offhand what ORAN gets from Barons in F2. So I would personally probably go for, I mean, any of these first 3 drops are good. The YELLOWBOZE Condrio drop is an option you can go for. I would probably just hunt it from one of these ones though, honestly. Particularly if you get an RBR week. Which again, if you're not familiar with RBR, RBR is a thing that Ephinea does every week where it picks 3 quests, 1 from each episode, and it boosts things like the experience rate, the rare drop rate, and so on. So keep an eye out for that, because if there's something you're hunting that's in an area that's covered by an RBR quest, then it's worth your while running it. So that is Dialect Scar. We also have another option for Lame d'Argent. So this drop again has just changed recently on Ephinea. This used to be from a Dorfon. So the Skylight drop is now from a Goran Detonator in Desert at 1 in 1462. There are some quests that have a lot of Goran Detonators in, so this is a pretty good drop for Skylight. I don't know if it's one of the best drops necessarily, but it's definitely up there. So again, if you want to go for an Excalibur, Skylight might be the option you go for to hunt it. We also have Vivienne. So Vivienne is a really strong double saber. It's also usable by female rangers and forces as well. So, and it also has a TP steal special, which is quite useful as well. It also has a set effect with Sweetheart for increased attack speed, although realistically that's not going to matter because you'll probably be using a Heavenly Battle or a V101 anyway, which would override this. But it's a very, very good double saber anyway. There are only 2 drops in the game for Vivienne, Skylight and PINKAL, and it's the same drop for both from a Temple El Rapi at 1 in 1024. So either Skylight or PINKAL will work for this. Again, you can also get it from Black Pepper's deal, but again, it would have no attributes, which you don't want on a melee weapon. So next up we have Heaven Punisher, which is one of the rarest handguns in the game. So Heaven Punisher is one of what I would call the big three, which are Lavis Cannon, Heaven Punisher, and Psycho Wand, which are three very, very rare items that drop on every single section ID. So all of the IDs can find those three items, but there are definitely IDs that have a better time for it. Heaven Punisher is not particularly strong, but when the hundredths digit of the beat time is even, it special becomes Divine Punishment, which is the laser beams from the sky that flinch everything. So you can also turn Heaven Punisher into a weapon called Mille Marteau in episode 4 by combining it with an Unfairly Seize, which is a really, really strong mech gun. To be brutally honest, I would probably keep it as a Heaven Punisher because it gets worse for using Divine Punishment, but it's a nice sort of bragging rights weapon. So you can see here, every single ID can get Heaven Punisher, but what you probably notice is the drop rate is horrible. So if you remember, the Section ID page recommended that Skylight is a good ID for it. So here's our Skylight drop, which is from an ultimate Sinnoh in Central Control Area, at 1 in 22,405. Now, is that an easy drop? No. It's a horrible drop. It's really, really hard. But in comparison to some of the other drops, it is definitely one of the easier ways to get Heaven Punisher. So when you're hunting something like this, there is no easy route. You know, the only one that's looks appealing at first glance is the BLUEFULL drop, but it's from a rare enemy. So there is no easy way of finding a Heaven Punisher. So you're basically trying to minimize the pain and choose the ID that is the least painful at this point. So Skylight is not a bad ID to go for it. And we also have another option for Red Ring as well. In regards to exclusives, we have Sealed J-Sword. Anyone who's watched my channel for any period of time knows how much I hate this weapon now. I've hunted this for years and I've still not found it. Sealed J-Sword is a sealed item. It is not particularly strong. It is notable because it is one of the only, well, I think it is the only weapon in the game that is a sword that is unreduced health, which is instant kill. The only other way of getting instant kill on a sword would be to use an S-rank sword, but S-rank sword can't have hit. So Sealed J-Sword is the only sword in the game that is capable of having unreduced health with hit. The main reason that you get Sealed J-Sword though is to unseal it. So after 23,000 kills, it changes into a weapon called Simakiri J-Sword, which is one of the strongest swords in the game and has a really unique special. Now, this weapon is absolutely infamous because it only drops on one ID, Skylight, and there is only one drop for it, so you have no options for this weapon. This is your drop. The only option for it is from an ultimate Gigu in Central Control Area at 1 in 12,603, Gigu being a kind of mini-boss. So you're basically going to be running a lot of control tower. I would say as well, I know I have seen some people in the YouTube comments that have said that they've been hunting this offline. I would honestly say to anyone, if you are playing the game offline, don't bother. And I mean that genuinely. I genuinely believe that this weapon is not worth hunting if you're offline only. Because offline only, the only way you're going to be able to do this is to run Seaside. Unless you've got episode 1 and 2 plus, you might be able to do tower through that. But that was only sold in certain parts of the world anyway. If you're offline only and don't have access to tower, your only option is going to be to run Seaside with 1 Gigu at the end and then reset. So you'll be doing a whole run of Seaside for 1 Gigu for a 1 in 12,603 drop. It is pointless. If you want to go ahead with it, by all means, but I would thoroughly advise against it. I would say if you're playing online and you can do tower, by all means go for it. It'll still be incredibly hard to get, but yeah, I would really advise against hunting it offline. But yeah, if you do want to seal J-Sword, you have to go Skylight. It is the only ID that finds it. So next up we have BLUEFULL. BLUEFULL gets a lot of partisan drops and quite a lot of rod drops. On the downside, it doesn't get many shots and it barely gets any ones. So you can see that BLUEFULL is kind of shaping up to be more of a sort of hunter-focused ID, which again is what Skylight is as well. Skylight again is very sort of hunter biased. So with BLUEFULL, we have a few drops. So we have this one, the however you pronounce this, VIRIDIA, take your pick. This is a partisan that is a 9-star partisan. Now, typically a lot of 9-star weapons you won't even think about. They're pretty much junk once you get to a certain point in the game. And VIRIDIA is pretty much junk unless it has hit. However, if you can get a VIRIDIA with hit, with a good amount of hit, it is by far one of the strongest weapons in the game. And that is entirely down to how its special works. So its special is a version of charge. Charge being the special where you use money to do more damage. Now, charge normally, when you use it, it will sacrifice 200 Mazetta to do times 3.33% damage. Sorry, times 3.3 times damage. However, with VIRIDIA, it uses 10,000 Mazetta instead, and it has a modifier of times 5.67, so it's much stronger. And the accuracy modifier is better as well, as it says here, so it has the accuracy of a heavy attack instead of a special attack. So in PSO, your light attacks are your most accurate, your heavy attacks are slightly less accurate, and your specials are even less accurate again. So VIRIDIA has a bigger attack modifier and more accuracy, but uses a lot more money. The other thing you need to know about VIRIDIA as well is that with charge weapons, if you miss, you don't use money. With VIRIDIA, if you miss, you still use 10,000 Mazetta. So you kind of need to get one with hit. Generally, this is used a lot at endgame for hunters. If you can get one with really, really high hit, because it's a really fast way of taking care of dangerous spawns. Now, there are a lot of drops for VIRIDIA because it is only a 9-star. You can see there are tons of drops here. It even drops in boxes. But what you can see is there are a huge amount of BLUEFULL drops, and that is because as BLUEFULL is an ID that focuses on partisans, you tend to find that if an ID has a preference for a certain weapon type, it tends to translate a bit into the rare weapons as well. So for example, with Skylight, because Skylight gets a lot of common sword drops, you also find that it gets quite a lot of rare sword drops as well. Similarly with BLUEFULL, you get a lot of common partisan drops, so you also end up with quite a lot of rare partisan drops as well. So this is why they recommend BLUEFULL, because there are tons of different drops for it. So that is VIRIDIA. Bit of a strange weapon, but definitely one that you want to keep an eye out for. We also have Yunchan, which is another partisan that has a Berserk special. Again, BLUEFULL being partisan focused ID, tends to have a good rate for it. There is also Zanba. Zanba is a sword with a Berserk special that is only used by male characters. Again, there are only 4 drops for this. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of disagree with Ephinea here. So there are 4 drops for Zanba. You see 3 of them are from Ultimate Sinnoh Zellers at 1 in 900, which is the red Sinnoh in Seabed. YELLOWBOZE gets it from a Sinnoh Zoa at a slightly worse rate, but the Sinnoh Zoa is the blue robot. Honestly, if you're hunting Zanba, I would go for the YELLOWBOZE drop instead of the BLUEFULL. Even though it's a worse drop rate, Sinnoh Zoas are a much more common enemy than Sinnoh Zellers. So personally, I do kind of disagree with the Ephinea wiki here. Personally, I would probably go towards the YELLOWBOZE drop if you are going for Zanba. That is my personal opinion. Other people may prefer to go for the Zele drop, but for me, I think the Zoa drop is much easier. It's also a good ID for hunting Heaven Punisher, which we've already covered. So BLUEFULL Heaven Punisher drop is from Episode 1 Hildator. Now, Hildator is the rare version of a Hildelt. So it's a 1 in 500 chance for a Hildelt to be a Hildator. On Ephinea, it might differ on other servers. And then it's a 1 in 205 chance for the Hildator to drop a Heaven Punisher. So although 1 in 205 might sound tempting, you also need to bear in mind that you need to combine that 1 in 205 with the 1 in 500 chance of it being a Hildator. So it is still an extremely hard drop. So you basically need to do enough runs to get a Hildator to show up. And then when a Hildator does show up, you need to hope for a 1 in 205 drop from that specific enemy. So yeah, good luck. Having said that, it is still probably one of the easier ways to hunt a Heaven Punisher. Particularly if you can do it during a rare drop week on Ephinea. So on Ephinea, we have like a rotating boost that rotates every week. And if there's a rare drop boost, I think you get a plus 25% rare drop boost, so that'll help the rare drop rate a little bit. You could also do it during rare enemy week as well, because that would increase the chances of seeing a Hilda in the first place. So that would help slightly. It's still going to be a very, very hard drop, but it is probably one of the better ways to hunt a Heaven Punisher. Ultimately, it kind of depends on how you want to hunt it. So if you want the reliability of having an enemy that always has a chance to drop it, then something like Scarlet is probably better, because every Sinnoh you kill is going to have a chance to drop in a Heaven Punisher. Whereas for BLUEFULL, you need that rare enemy to appear to even have a chance, but if it does appear, you've got a much better chance. So it depends kind of which way you want to hunt it, really. BLUEFULL is also good for Heaven Striker. So again, Heaven Striker from a Deldy. Again, I personally wouldn't go for this drop. It's not terrible by any means. It's only a little bit worse drop rate than the GREENILL and REDRIA drops. And there are quests that have a lot of Deldies in episode 1, like Endless Nightmare 4. But I would, for Heaven Striker personally, I would probably veer towards the GREENILL or REDRIA drops. However, one area it is good for is Psycho Wand. Psycho Wand is probably one of the rarest things in the game, and it's another one of the big 3 that I mentioned. So again, Lavis Cannon, Heaven Punisher, and Psycho Wand. Psycho Wand is another one of those 3 that drops from every single ID, but there are some IDs for this in particular that you would just never hunt it on. So Psycho Wand is actually a really useful weapon. It doesn't actually give you any mental strength or anything, which is unusual, but what it does is it gives you a 30% boost to Rafoy, Razonde, and Rabata. And it also reduces your TP costs by 50%. It does, however, reduce the full TP cost from your HP. So you'll basically be hurting yourself every time you cast with the Psycho Wand, but it is by far one of the best weapons in the game. So, drops for it. Again, as I mentioned, every single ID can get it. You can see some of these rates are awful. You know, in particular, shout out to this WHITILL drop at 1 in 299,593 from a tower enemy. Or the PINKAL drop, which is unusual because, as we'll get onto, PINKAL is actually a good Force ID, not for Psycho 1 though. Sinnoh 1 in nearly 300,000. Or BLUEFULL, you can see we have an ultimate Delbiter drop at 1 in 12,603. So it's still, again, very hard drop, but if you run something like Phantasmal World 3, that has quite a lot of Delbiters. Interestingly, VIRIDIA does also have the exact same drop for this from a Delbiter, but at a much worse drop rate. So if you are going for the Delbiter drop, just make sure you're doing it on BLUEFULL. Again, there's a few IDs I would recommend for Psycho Wand, but BLUEFULL is definitely one option. And I know at least one person has found it through the BLUEFULL drop that I'm aware of. It's probably not the drop I would use personally, but it is definitely one of the best options for Psycho Wand for sure. It's also a good ID for Limiter as well. I believe it gets Limiter from Astarks in episode 4. Again, the drop rate isn't that great for it, but Astarks are really farmable and are very easy to farm. So I would probably honestly go for the BLUEFULL drop for Limiter. Next one is PURPLENUM. So PURPLENUM gets a lot of mech guns. So this is fantastic for finding things like charged Vulcans. It's also quite good for daggers, but it's quite bad for swords and quite bad for partisans. Interestingly, PURPLENUM doesn't seem to have a weapon type it's very bad at. So recommended items, again, it's another one of the IDs that gets Frozen Shooter, which makes it again good for rangers. It's also really good for Heaven Striker. It gets Heaven Striker from Condrieu in episode 4 at 1 in 8. So all you need to do for that is just spam Point of Disaster and just hope for the rare boss. It's also a good ID for Heaven Punisher. So Heaven Punisher for PURPLENUM is from a Merricarol, which are the annoying plants in episode 2 that instant kill you with their projectiles. And it's 1 in 12,603. So this is roughly as hard as CLJ Sword, but there are more quests with easily farmable Mericals, I feel. So this is definitely one of the better options for Heaven Punisher. I think if I was going for Heaven Punisher, I would probably either go with, it's basically these 3 IDs more or less. So Skylight, Bluefull or PurpleNum. I probably wouldn't even pay attention to the other IDs. Next up is Ephinea Vice. So this again is a 9-star. And again, the reason this is mentioned is for trying to get one with high hit percentage. So Ephinea Vice has a Berserk special, and because of that, it has extremely high damage output. Because sacrificial specials on mech guns are ridiculously overpowered in late game, which is why a lot of hunters use Charge Vulcans later on. This basically gives you another way to do that, so it's Berserk instead of Charge. The advantage of this though is that if you've got something like a Dark Flow, you can basically use the Ephinea Vice to blaze through enemies, get your health down by using Berserk, and then use the Dark Flow to trigger the special on Dark Flow. So there is some kind of... there is like a bit of a link between the two you can do. I personally have always preferred to use Charge. I'm personally of the playstyle where I prefer to play safe. So I don't tend to use Berserk that much in PSO. I know how strong it is, but it's just not my playstyle really. But if you want to go into the Berserk playstyle, then Ephinea Vice is a really good option for doing that. And PurpleNum is by far the best ID for it. Again, you can see here, it's just the sheer number of drops that PurpleNum has for it. Because it's a mech gun focused ID, it gets rare mech guns generally more often. And you've got a lot of options for hunting this. One thing I would say though for the VIRIDIA and for the Ephinea Vice, if you are going for one with hit, I would probably disregard all of the normal hard and very hard drops and just go for the ultimate drops. Simple reason is that ultimate tends to have a higher % chance of getting hit, so I would focus on those drops. But again, you can still see there is quite a few drops for it and they're not particularly hard. It's also another good ID for Spread Needle, again from a Merlin in Ruins. It's also another option for Psycho Wand. And for PurpleNum, similar to how Bluefull had the 1 in 205 drop from a rare enemy for Heaven Punisher, PurpleNum has a 1 in 205 drop for Psycho Wand from a Mill Lily, which is the rare lily in episode 1. This is the way I got mine. So I've seen a few people get it this way. I've seen people get it through Delbiter. I do know of someone who also found it through the Zelle drop, which is insane. They weren't actually looking for it, it just dropped. But yeah, most people I know who found Psycho Wands have either got it through Mill Lily or the Bluefull Delbiter. Mill Lily, obviously, advantage is lilies are very, very common enemies in caves. There are quests that have tons of them, so you can tend to farm them to try and get Mill Lilies quite easy. The downside is obviously you need the Mill Lily to show up to even have a chance of getting the Psycho Wand, and when it does show up, you've still got a 1 in 205 chance of getting it. So again, it is an extremely hard drop to get, but if you are going for Psycho Wand, it's one of the IDs I would recommend. Again, it's going to depend on whether you want to endlessly hunt for rare enemies and hope to get them to appear, or whether you want a guaranteed chance with every normal enemy. If you're wanting the guaranteed chance with every normal enemy, then you're probably going to go for the Delbiter drop on Bluefull. If you're wanting to hunt rare enemies and hope for the chance of getting Mill Lilies, then you're going to go for PurpleNum. So it's entirely up to you. I kind of feel that it's a 50-50 really. In reality, the drop rate for this is actually probably worse, because I think the chance of getting a Mill Lily multiplied by the chance of getting this drop ends up at about 1 in 104,000. But what you have to bear in mind though is that Ob Lilies are much more common enemies than Delbiters. So it's up to you which one you want to go with. As I say, I personally found it through Mill Lily, but I do know people who found it through Delbiter as well. So, also for PurpleNum, we have a unique drop, which is the Yasminkov 9000M. This is a mech gun that has rifle range. This was one of the, almost like a staple range weapon, particularly on GameCube and Xbox. Not so much on Blueburst, and there are other options like Heaven Striker that people tend to use, but the Yas 9K is still a really good item to use. This is a PurpleNum exclusive, and it only drops from 3 different areas. So from Canoons in Ep1, I would not use this drop because the Canoon is the leader one. So you do not want to use this drop. This is the drop that you would hunt it on, probably. In GameCube and Xbox, you would hunt it on this drop. The Temple Crimson Assassin at 1 in 788. In Blue Burst, we do have another option from Gorons in Episode 4 at 1 in 1517. This is also a totally valid drop. Drop rate is obviously a lot worse, but Gorons are much more common enemies than Crimson Assassins in Temple. So either of those two drops should work, but if you're on GameCube and Xbox, this was your drop that you went for. So yeah, very, very useful weapon. So next up we have PINKAL. PINKAL finds a lot of wands and quite a lot of partisans. They, however, don't find many shots and barely any rifles at all. Now, advantages of PINKAL. It's quite good for Disco Braveman. Now, Disco Braveman is another one of these weird 9-stars. Disco Braveman, although it's a 9-star and it's really, really easy to get, it's one of the best slices in the game. Simply because it has a Berserk special, it's quite easy to farm, so it's quite easy to get on with hit. And it also, in Blue Burst, has a set boost with the armor 13, which gives it plus 50% attack, plus 10% attack speed, and plus 30 ATA. So this set boost alone will basically give the equivalent of a 30-hit Disco Braveman. If you combine that with a hit Disco Braveman as well, so say you use a 30-hit Disco Braveman, you're effectively going to have a 60-hit Disco Braveman with a Berserk special. It is a disgusting weapon for how common it is. So PINKAL is recommended basically because it gets it from a Zolgibbon in Ultima here at 1 in 183. That is a very easy drop. Zolgibbons are fairly common in a lot of the Episode 2 quests that have a lot of enemies. You see, there are IDs that get a lot more of them, but PINKAL is still a decent option for getting it. It's also a good ID for Lame d'Argent. This drops from, I believe it's from Ulgibbons, I think. Yeah, from Ulgibbons. Drop rate isn't fantastic, but the good thing about this, and the other reason they might be recommending it, is because you've obviously got Disco Braveman from the Zolgibbons as well, so you can hunt this and Disco Braveman at the same time, and potentially get a Disco Braveman with hit. But there are a lot of quests that have tons of Ulgibbons, so the drop rate isn't the end of the world. It's also good for Slicer of Fanatic. So Slicer of Fanatic is quite a strong slicer. It only hits 3 targets instead of 4, and it has a demon special, which I believe is unreduced. So it is quite useful for certain situations. Honestly, Disco Braveman is probably better overall, but Slicer of Fanatic definitely has its uses. And you can see there are only 3 IDs that get it, and PINKAL is a pretty good option for it. I kind of feel that any of these are okay to hunt, honestly. The drop rates aren't too dissimilar, and all of these are pretty common enemies. So I would personally say, I think maybe the Oran drop is maybe slightly easier, but either of these 3 will work, honestly. They're really not that bad. Another item PINKAL is really good for is Rambling Mare. So Rambling Mare is a shot that's only usable by female characters. It's a bit of a weird weapon because it doesn't fire like a normal shot, so it fires 2 shots straight forward. And Rambling Mare is generally it's not really used by rangers. It's quite often used by Formal. Reason for that is because it needs 170 ATA to use, which is basically pretty much Formal's cap. So it's very hard for it to use. But Formal has a different shot animation to every other class, and her shot animation is very, very fast compared to other classes. So quite often you'll find that really high level Formals will use Rambling Mare as a legit damage option. Particularly if you can get on with hit to sort of counterbalance Formal's lower tier. Does also have a set boost with Safety Heart, which gives it plus 30 ATA as well. So that will effectively give you a 30-hit Rambling Mare. You see, there's only 3 drops for it. PINKAL is from a Mill Lily in Episode 2, so a Temple Mill Lily at 1 in 2. So it's really not that bad. Particularly if you do it during Rare Enemy Week, you're probably going to end up seeing Mill Lilies in Temple, so it's really not that hard to hunt. The main difficulty with this hunt is trying to find one with hit. The other options are from Temple L Rapes at the same rate as Vivienne for Skyline and PINKAL. Obviously, PINKAL has the advantage of, because it gets Mill Lily here, it also gets Vivienne as well from the Rapes, so it's a really, really good Temple ID. Should note as well here, it does actually say at the bottom that Rambling May was not available with hit on the official servers, so that's an Ephinea exclusive thing. But very, very good weapon. It's also another option for Limiter. Again, from Go to BLUEFULL, so exact same drop as VIRIDIA. And it's also good for V801. So V801 is pretty much a staple unit for forces in particular. It says it's considered a staple for all characters which use techniques regularly. I would disagree with that somewhat, just because a lot of characters that use techniques regularly just don't have the capacity to really be able to use a V801 because of other items they need to use. But for forces in particular, this is a definite item you want to get. It basically slightly increases your casting speed for techniques. It's not a huge increase, but it is noticeable. Again, there are 3 drops, and you can see here, PINKAL gets it from an Ultimate Zoo at 1 in 1280. PURPLENUM is another option for this as well. PURPLENUM gets it from the Pazuzu, which is the Rare Zoo, at 1 in 2. Again, the issue is you've got to get the Pazuzu to show up first. So again, it boils down to, do you want to try and spam for a rare enemy? Or do you want to just have a chance of getting it from every time you kill a normal enemy? We do have the same drop there for ORAN as well. For PINKAL exclusives, we've got this item called Cleo. Cleo is a cane from episode 4. It's got really high attack power, unusually. And while it's equipped, it gives you a boost to your Grant's damage, and it also doubles the range of Zalur. Now, the reason that people would use this, it's kind of a bit of a niche weapon. Basically, the reason that you use this is it's mainly for Whirl. To an extent, Raymal as well, because they're able to use it. So it's mainly used for Whirl and Raymal. And the reason for that is because it's pretty much the only way they've got of being able to boost their Zalur range. For forces, as it says here, you don't really need to use it because forces have access to Glide Divine, which boosts Jelen and Zalur range, whereas Cleo is only Zalur. It should also be noted as well that Cleo was not equipable by Whirls on the original servers. This was only equipable by forces and Raymal. On Ephinea, they've added Whirl to the equipable list. So yeah, very, very niche weapon. Honestly, even though I main Whirl, I've never used it. But I can see why it could be useful in some areas, because having the double boost to Zalur range is quite useful. As for the drop, it is a PINKAL exclusive from Dauphin Eclair, so from the Rare Dauphin in episode 4 at 1 in 2. Now, another thing that it doesn't say on here is PINKAL also gets improved drop rates for tech amplifiers and barriers that for tech, so things like red barrier, blue barrier, yellow barrier, and then your amplifiers, so things like amplifier of Foy, amplifier of blue, all of those have improved drop rates on PINKAL. So what you can see by looking at PINKAL is a very force focused ID. It does get a few decent hunter weapons as well, so you could potentially get away with using it as a hunter, but it's more designed towards force. So if we go to REDRIA is a really, really balanced ID. Gets increased rates on common frames and slicers, but less daggers. The boosted slicers is really useful because it means you're slightly more likely to get a slicer with hit, which is very useful for REDRIA because one of REDRIA's exclusive drops is Magic Stone Iritista. Magic Stone Iritista is a tool that you use on a slicer to turn it into a rainbow baton. So Rainbow Baton is a really decent slicer with good attack power. Special really isn't that good. It only has a chaos special, which is Confuse. It's not a bad option. It's basically a good option to use for a slicer if you want good damage without having to use a sacrificial special. So if you don't want to use something like Disc of Bravement and sacrifice your HP, Rainbow Baton is a good option for that. But if you want to get a Rainbow Baton, the only option you've got is to use REDRIA. Because the item to make it, Magic Stone Amethysta, is a REDRIA exclusive. This drops from Hill to Tor. I think on Ephinea it drops in episode 1 and 2. I know on the older servers it used to just be episode 1. And it's 1 in 21. So it is quite a hard item to get. If we then move on to some of the other items for REDRIA. So REDRIA, again, because we get more slices generally, we get quite a lot of drops for Disco Braveman. REDRIA is also one of the best IDs for Lavis Cannon, so again, one of the big three. So Lavis Cannon is a saber that fires a piercing wave that sacrifices some HP. It's honestly not very good. It's really strong, but it's a saber, so it only hits one target, and it's just outclassed entirely by Excalibur in episode 4. And sabers generally just aren't that useful for the most part. You know, Excalibur kind of being an exception to that, maybe Galatine as well. So Lavis was definitely more used on 1 and 2, I believe, but it's still a really cool weapon, and it's definitely one of the best looking sabers for sure. Lavis also has the ability to transform into different items as well. Now, to get Lavis, again, Lavis is one of these items that drops on every single ID, but there are IDs that are much better for it. For REDRIA, we have a drop from Purely Slime, which is more commonly known as Red Slime. So it's the rare version of the Porphyuli Slimes. And it's a 1 in 21 rate. It's not that bad, honestly. It's not an easy hunt by any means, because 1 in 21 from a rare enemy is still quite hard. I've been hunting this the last couple of weeks now. I've had no luck at all with it so far. But for Lavis, it is definitely one of the better options. It's also a good ID for Cannon Rouge, Bazooka, with really, really high attack power. It gets this from, I believe it's from Babootas in episode 4. So again, there are some quests that have a lot of Babootas, so very, very good. It's another option for Heaven Striker, which we covered earlier. It gets it from Pyro Goron, so same as GREENILL. It does say Spread Needle. I would kind of disagree with this, because REDRIA gets Spread Needle from a Darkbringer at 1 in 358. Now, yes, there are quests that have quite a lot of Darkbringers, but I generally find that the Spread Needle drop is easy to get from the Merlins, even though it's a worse drop rate, just because there are so many more Merlins. REDRIA is also another ID that gets Red Ring, and is another option for V502 as well. But yeah, overall, very, very balanced ID, and is a great complementary ID to some more specialist ones. If we then move on to ORAN, ORAN gets a lot of daggers and quite a lot of swords, so obviously very hunter-centric. It doesn't get many shots, and it barely gets any rods. So you're probably not going to want to use ORAN Force necessarily. As for drops, we have another good drop for Daylight Scar. So Daylight Scar for ORAN is from a Del Saber in Spaceship. Again, I can't remember what it gets from a Barons in Spaceship, but it may take away the good Barons drop. But it's still a very, very good drop for hunting Daylight Scar. Honestly, probably the easiest Daylight Scar drop, I think. But there isn't too much difference between this and the Skylight or YELLOWBOZE drop. It's also another option for Lame d'Argent. So for ORAN Lame d'Argent, ORAN gets it from Condrieu, the rare boss in episode 4, at 1 in 8. So a very, very huntable way of doing it. Particularly during Rare Enemy Week, it's going to be quite easy to get Condrieu to show up, and then a 1 in 8 chance really isn't too bad. It is another option for Slicer of Fanatic, which I think it gets from Satellite Lizards. It's also a good idea for Prophets of Motav. Now, this, on the older versions of the game, Prophets of Motav used to be ORAN exclusive. It would only drop on ORAN. So for ORAN, for Prophets of Motav, it's basically a wand. It boosts your Raphoi, Razonda, and Rabata by 20%. Its special is absolutely useless. It casts level 5 Jelen and Zala, which is pointless because it's a force item anyway. And generally, Prophets of Motav is kind of passed over because Psycho Wand gives you a bigger boost to your Ratex, reduces your TP consumption, and honestly, I do kind of agree with the wiki here. Psycho Wand is easy to get. Reason being is because Prophets of Motav, the only options you have are these 2 drops. So the Oran drop is from our Ultimate Ruins Darkbringer at 1 in 11,457. Or PINKAL from a Grand Sorcerer in Spaceship at 1 in 40,000. And again, on previous versions, outside of Ephinea, this PINKAL drop didn't exist. It was purely Oran exclusive, which made it an extremely hard item to get. On Ephinea, there is one reason to hunt it, which is they've got these things called red ring platings, which make the red ring look different. And a Prophet's Motive is an ingredient you need to make one of the platings, so they have made a reason to hunt it. But yeah, generally, if you're looking to hunt it to actually use, I honestly wouldn't bother. I would just go for a Psycho Wand. Speaking of Psycho Wand, so our Oran drop for Psycho Wand is from a Gibbles at 1 in 12,603. This, I think, is a worse drop than BLUEFULL and PURPLENUM, but there is a way to spam this quickly. So if you do a quest called Phantasmal World 4, the first floor of the tower, the only enemies in the tower on the first floor is you have an Ilgil to start, then you have a Gibbles, then a second Gibbles, then a Del Lily, and then another Gibbles. And all you would do with Oran is you would basically just run that floor and reset. You could clear the floor in probably less than 2 minutes, honestly. And you would just reset over and over again. It's an incredibly boring hunt to do it this way, but it is a perfectly viable option for going for Psycho Wand. As I said, personally for me, I would probably veer towards the BLUEFULL or PURPLENUM drops, but that is definitely another option. It's also very good for S-Parts version 201. So S-Parts is a fairly low level barrier, only level 17 to equip, only usable by casts, and it's very, very popular because it gives you a 15 ATA boost, which is very, very useful in particular for hunter androids. So it's a very good way, particularly for Hucast, of getting around Hucast's accuracy issues. Hucasil, it helps, but obviously Hucasil has quite high ATA anywhere. Later on, you would probably want to switch it out for a red ring, but S-Parts is a very, very good item to find. Now, a lot of IDs do find it, and what you'd see is a lot of them actually find it in normal difficulty, but it's from a guild chick at 1 in 10,600. If we then go to Oran though, Oran has some other options. So Oran also gets it from a Dark Gunner in normal at 1 in 7,500, or from a Ultimate Guild chick in Mines at 1 in 10,000. I do find it funny that the Ultimate Mines drop is actually worse drop rate than the normal Mines drop. I never realised that actually. But I would go for this every time, simply because spamming Ultimate is much more interesting than spamming normal. However, the option to do it in normal is there if you want to do it. So it does give you some different options for S-Parts with Oran, whereas the other IDs only give you the option for normal. So Oran is also very good for Cincesta. So Cincesta is an item that you use to turn Lavis Cannon into other things. So it turns Lavis Cannon into Lavis Blade, it turns Lavis Blade into Double Cannon, and it turns Double Cannon back into Lavis Cannon. This, for Oran, again, it drops from a few IDs, but Oran gets it from a Hilzator at 1 in 21, so it's probably one of the easiest way of hunting it. If we then move to YELLOWBOZE, so YELLOWBOZE is a very weird ID. So YELLOWBOZE actually gets no increased chance of weapon types. So all weapons are pretty much equal rates for YELLOWBOZE. However, it does get increased Mazetta drops. And at least on Ephinea, it gives plus attribute chance, so you have more chance of getting attribute chances and weapons in episode 1. Now this, if you're playing offline on GameCube, for example, I think this was different. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I am sure that on the official Sega servers and on the offline game, I'm sure it was increased chance of hit in episode 2 instead. So on the older versions of the game, as in GameCube and Xbox, I'm sure that the chance of hitting episode 1 in Ultimate was about 5%, and I think it was 1% in episode 2. On Ephinea, I believe they've increased the chance of hitting episode 2 to 5% as well. So then they've changed YELLOWBOZE's perk to increase attribute chance in episode 1 instead. which makes sense because it was basically taking away a perk from YELLOWBOZE. So that's our positives on YELLOWBOZE. So again, very strange ID. We do get a slightly lower chance on shots, so I guess it's equal chance of every weapon apart from shots. As for recommended drops, we have another option for Daylight Scar, which is from our Barons. We have another option for Lame d'Argent, which in this case is from a Sinnoh Red in Mines at 1 in 1,600. I probably wouldn't recommend this drop. There are quests that have a lot of Sinnoh Reds, but I just think there are easier drops to hunt Lame on, personally. But it is an option. It's not a terrible drop by any means. It's also another option for Cannon Rouge and Frozen Shooter and Spread Needle. So you can see it is quite a good ID for rangers actually, because there is a lot of good ranger items here. It's also an option for the LK38 Combat that we mentioned earlier, which is from Americarol at 1 in 394. Again, personally not the ID I would hunt it on, but it is an option. It's also another option for V101. So V101 for YELLOWBOZE is from a Barons in Mines at 1 in just under 3,000. Again, there are quests that have a lot of Barons in them, so this could be a totally viable drop option. Now for exclusives, we only really have one big exclusive for YELLOWBOZE, which is the 3084 Flower Sword. So every ID gets a version of Flower Sword as a 10-star version, and every ID gets a 10-star version of DB's sword as well. Now most of them are not worth mentioning because most of them are pretty weak. They don't have specials. There is one or two of them that are very, very rare and are just there purely for like a bragging rights item. They're just extremely rare. The 3084 Flowers is pretty much the exception. So its attack power isn't particularly strong. It only has 300 to 320. It does, however, grind to 85, which adds a lot more attack power to it. It does give you a bit of luck, which is nice. Its accuracy is nothing really that special. The main reason you use this is because it's the only 10-star version of Flowers that has a special, which is Spirit. This makes it absolutely fantastic for Hunuel. It's also quite good for Humor, but Humor I find would probably go towards Zanba instead because of the Berserk special, whereas Hunuel can't use Zanba because Zanba is male only. So for a Hunuel, the 384 Flowers is a really nice source of damage, particularly if you can get on with hit. Obviously Hunuel has quite a lot of TP anyway as well, so you do have a bit more effectively ammo for your Spirit special to use. So a very, very strong weapon for Hunuel. Now, YELLOWBOZE exclusive, and it's a very easy drop. It drops from Ob Lily, which is the normal lilies in episode 2 Ultimate, at 1 in 213. You will get loads of these drops. It is really, really easy to find. The main difficulty with the hunt for this is just trying to find one with a good amount of hit. But once you can get one, again, very, very strong weapon for Humor and Hunuel, but particularly for Hunuel. So then finally, we move on to Whitill. So Whitill again is a very balanced ID overall. It gets a lot of slices, so again, it's very, very good for finding slices that are good for things like charge discers or berserk discers, or for like fodder items to use to turn into a rainbow baton. Obviously, the disadvantage is that you're not going to have the ability to access the Magic Stone Aretista because that's a REDRIA exclusive. It also gets quite a lot of mech guns, which, as I've said earlier, are very, very useful for hunters and rangers. The downside is you don't get many shots. Now, as for drops, again, because we get a lot of slices, we get a lot of Disco Bravement drops, which I mentioned earlier is a very, very strong slicer later on. It's also another option for the Slicer of Fanatic and for the Frozen Shooter. It is also another option for Hang on Gold, which again I did mention earlier. Now for gold, I would personally probably go towards the GREENILL drop for gold, but there is the option to hunt it on Whitill, and it is the only other ID that finds it. So it's up to you. I would personally go for the GREENILL drop. All of these are horrible though, so there is no good option. However, we also get Handgun Miller. So I want to say that on the older versions like GameCube and Xbox, I want to say that I think Handgun Gold might have been a GREENILL exclusive, and I think Handgun Miller was a WHITILL exclusive. They have changed it a bit on Ephinea. So on Ephinea, you can see now 3 IDs actually find Miller. We have GREENILL, pretty awful drop. We have PINKAL, pretty awful drop. And WHITILL, by far the easiest drop. So Tolors are an enemy. They're fairly uncommon in Forest. They're the equivalent of a Gigaboomer in Ultimate. But if you do quests like Lost Heat Sword has absolutely tons of these, and is very spammable very quickly and very easy. So this drop rate isn't too much of a big deal. I mean, it's still a hard hunt, but you can farm through these very, very quickly. Now, with Miller, you can also get it through Black Pepper's deal. So that is an option, and you can get Miller very easily doing this, but it would have no attributes. And since it's a combination item that you want to combine to make Gold Miller, you probably won't want to have hit, ideally, if possible. And if you get a Miller this way, through Black Pepper's deal, that means that you need to then get a Gold with hit. And as you've seen, Gold is much, much harder to find than Miller. So honestly, if you are going to try and get one with hit, I would go for a Miller with hit and actually hunt it, personally. But there is no good way about it. You know, it is going to be a miserable hunt getting Gold Miller, regardless of which option you go for. We also get an option for Heaven Striker. So Heaven Striker, we get it from a Sinnoh Zoa in Seabed. Drop rate's not great, but again, there are quests that have quite a few Zoas, so it is potentially an option. Again, I would probably veer towards the REDRIA or GREENILL drops personally, but this is still viable. It also gets Red Ring, and we also get V502 as well. And there's no real notable exclusives. Now, one thing this page does miss out is there is actually another exclusive, at least one exclusive for every ID. In fact, there's probably more than one. There is a Section ID card for every single Section ID. They are purely for collector items, basically. They are terrible weapons, but they're items like VIRIDIA card, Skylight card, PURPLENUM card. They only drop for their respective IDs, but they're not worth using. They're more just for collection more than anything else. I think some of them can be used in the Forge as well as trading items. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, there is an exclusive Flown Sword and an exclusive DB Sword for every ID as well, but most of those are junk. So what you can see, if you quickly look through these, you can see that VIRIDIA is kind of geared more towards, I would say, Hunters and Rangers. GREENILL is definitely a Ranger-focused ID. Skylight is definitely more Hunter-focused, with a slight Ranger focus as well. BLUEFULL, I would say, is more towards probably Hunter Ranger. PURPLENUM, I would say, is more very much Ranger focused. There is a bit of an option for Force as well, so I would say probably Ranger Force. PINKAL is definitely more of a Force focused ID. REDRIA is very balanced and you can kind of get away with using it on anything. ORAN is probably more Hunter focus. YELLOWBOZE, again, very balanced. You can use it on pretty much anything. And the same for WHITILL as well. I would say for WHITILL, maybe slightly more towards Hunter and Ranger. There is a bit less for Force, but it's still pretty balanced ID overall. You can see here as well, we do have a table. I will leave a link to this page in the description as well, so you can check it for yourself. But you can see that there is the percentage chance of what each weapon type is. So for Skylight, for example, you get a 13% chance of sabers, 13% chance of swords, 7% daggers, 6% partisans, 6% slicers, 13% handguns, 10% rifles, 1% mech guns, because that's our weapon we don't get many of, 4% shots, 13% canes, 7% rods, and 7% wands. So you can see where each of the IDs has their own specialities. Again, you know, PURPLENUM, you're looking at mech guns. So that is a rough overview of how the Section IDs kind of work. There is also differences with the techers as well, on Ephinea at least. So different techers will have different percentage chances of giving you the plus 10% tech. I may go into that in another video though, because it's a little bit more in depth, and I realise this has already been a really long video anyway. If you do have any questions at all about the section IDs, or if you're not sure on which section ID to go for, just leave a comment below and I will try and help out where I can. Ultimately, what you need to remember as well is that even if you're not sure if you picked the right ID, if someone else makes the game for you and you play multiplayer, then the game will use their section ID anyway. So you can kind of, by playing with the friends and with other people, you can get around any weaknesses your section ID might have. So if I'm playing Skyline and I need some good armor, I'm not going to find it myself typically. So I would probably then look for example, a REDRIA player to play with to try and find some armor drops. So you can get around it. So don't feel that you've ruined your character or anything by picking a certain section ID, because you can play on, the whole point is that you play with other people anywhere and you use their IDs to find things that you want. So I hope that's been relatively useful. If you do have any questions at all about the section ID system, just leave them below and I will try and help where I can. But yeah, I'll leave that one there. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, or joining as a member on YouTube. You can also follow or sub over on Twitch. You can also use Twitch Prime over there as well. Please also join our Discord as well, where we do play games off stream as well. And I'll leave a link to that in the description, as well as a link to this wiki page as well. But yeah, hope you found that useful, and I'll see you guys in the next video.